Hey everybody, it's Troy. Hey, listen, some extraordinary events are unfolding on the ground in Russia. Right now, we learned yesterday that the Wagner Group, the massive paramilitary, private army, private militia run by Yevgeny Prigozhin, turned on Putin, turned his forces away from Ukraine. They had been fighting in Ukraine, and in fact, the Wagner Group had been one of the major Russian fighting forces in Ukraine. They're some of the best equipped, best trained troops that Russia has, this private army that was personally loyal to Putin. They have turned, they have left Ukraine, they have headed into Russia. Yevgeny Prigozhin announced that the official statements about what had been going on in Ukraine were not true. He said the publicly stated reasons for the full-scale invasion were false. He stated that after plundering Donbass for 8 straight years, the Russian elite got greedy and wanted more.
С 14 по 22 год. Донбасс весь распиливался. Донбасс разворовывался различными людьми. Существовали корпуса народной милиции, которые в случае нападения украинцев должны были в 40 тысяч, 20 тысяч оставлялось в кассе, 20 тысяч давалось тому, кто подписывает, если боец существовал и сидит дома, подготовка не велась.
This is Yevgeny Prigozhin, leader of the Wagner Group, criticizing the Russian oligarchs, the Russian elites, for invading Ukraine to enrich themselves off of Ukraine's resources, saying they got greedy after Donbass. Shortly after that, Prigozhin claimed that his camp, the Wagner camp, where his troops were staying, was hit by a missile, and that the missile had not come from the Ukrainians, it had come from the Russians. Prigozhin claiming that the Russian Ministry of Defense ordered an attack on the Wagner Group. A missile hit their camp, destroying their camp. They escaped. After that, Prigozhin vowed revenge on the Ministry of Defense for that missile strike. Prigozhin calling the attack on the Wagner Group camp as a Russian attack on his troops. Prigozhin then began marching the Wagner Group back into Russia, at which point senior Russian authorities charged Prigozhin with inciting armed rebellion. A statement was released from a Russian commander begging the Wagner Group to stop, stating, "I call on you to stop. The enemy is waiting for our internal political situation to aggravate. We shouldn't play into the enemy's hand in this difficult time for the country. It needs to be done before it's too late to obey the will and order of the people elected president of the Russian Federation. Stop the columns and return them to their permanent positions and places of concentration." Right around that same time, Russian state TV interrupted a regular broadcast, cut into a regular broadcast to read a message from the Ministry of Defense stating that incoming claims made by the Wagner mercenary group do not correspond, quote, do not correspond to reality. We then began to see images of the Wagner Group moving into the Russian city with their troops and their tanks, moving into the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, where Prigozhin claims they have captured the military base there without firing a shot.
Мы находимся в штабе, 7 часов 30 минут утра, под контролем военные объекты Ростова, в том числе аэродром. Самолеты, которые уходят для боевой работы, уходят штатно, проблем никаких нету. Санитарные борта уходят, проблем нет. Все, что делается, это мы взяли под контроль, чтобы штурмовая авиация не наносила удары по нам, а наносила по украинцам.
Красный это Минобороны, белый вот это Вагнер.
Когда мы пришли сюда, то мы еще раз подтвердили много новое. Огромное количество территорий потеряно. Солдат убитых в 3-4 раза больше, чем это в документах подается наверх. А то, что подается, это в 10 раз меньше, чем говорят по телевизору. Санитарные потери в день составляют некоторые дни до 1000 человек. Это убитые, без вести пропавшие, раненые и так называемые отказники, которые отказываются не потому, что они струсили, я уже говорил. Мы хотим получить начальника генштаба и шайку. Пока их не будет, мы находимся здесь, блокируем город Ростов и идем в Москву. Мы пришли сюда для того, чтобы прекратился позор страны, в которой мы живем. Мы спасаем Россию.
The implications here and the footage coming out of that city seem to back this up, that the Russian military in that region has also turned on Putin, has joined the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group has met next to no resistance so far once they turned their sights back to Russia away from Ukraine. So this is indicative of a massive coup. At this point, we can call it that. We can call it a massive coup against Vladimir Putin. Russian troops are either surrendering, getting out of the way, or joining up with the Wagner Group as they make their way towards Moscow, which is Prigozhin's stated destination. He stated that the Wagner Group is going to Moscow. Vladimir Putin released a televised statement this morning before fleeing Moscow. No one knows where Vladimir Putin is, but he released a televised statement.
Обращаюсь и к тем, кого обманом или угрозами втянули в преступную авантюру, толкнули на путь тяжкого преступления, вооруженного мятежа. Россия сегодня ведет тяжелейшую борьбу за свое будущее, отражает агрессию неонацистов и их хозяев. Против нас направлена фактически вся военная, экономическая, информационная машина Запада. Это удар в спину нашей стране и нашему народу. И именно такой удар был нанесен по России в 1917 году, когда страна вела Первую мировую войну. Но победу у нее украли. Интриги, склоки, политиканство за спиной армии и народа обернулись величайшим потрясением, разрушением армии и распадом государства, утратой громадных территорий. В итоге трагедией гражданской войны.
Putin forces calling for the arrest of Prigozhin for armed rebellion against the Russian Federation. Putin claiming that this is an attempt to start a civil war, hearkening back to the Russian Civil War of the early 1920s, splitting Russian against Russian. Prigozhin, for his part, is claiming that he is not trying to topple Putin. He said that repeatedly, that is not his goal, that Putin has been misrepresenting the goal of the Wagner Group in their return to Russia and their march on Moscow, that he is not seeking to overthrow Putin. But at this point, you've got to figure that Putin thinks it's an attempted coup on Putin. And the calls for the arrest of Prigozhin for armed rebellion have signaled that a coup has begun, at least in the eyes of the Russian government, of the Putin government. They believe this is a coup. They are going after Prigozhin. This is the biggest domestic threat to Putin's leadership, the biggest threat, period, to Putin's leadership in his 22-year reign over the Russian Federation. He's never faced a serious coup like this, but this tends to be the way that Russian leadership is changed. In the history of the Soviet Union, the general secretaries of the Soviet Union were replaced by coups. They do not have a system of electoral democracy in Russia, even now in the Russian Federation, post-Soviet Union, which purports to be a republic, a republic with free and fair elections. It's very obvious that free and fair elections do not take place in Russia, as exemplified by the last 2 decades of Putin's rule. So it would probably take a coup. That is the Russian tradition, the Russian style. It would take a coup to remove Putin. It appears that that coup is underway. Whether or not it will be successful remains to be seen. If it is not successful, it is almost guaranteed that Putin will double down on his authoritarianism. He will clamp down even harder on dissent and plunge Russia further into authoritarianism into a Putin-driven dictatorship. These are absolutely remarkable events we're witnessing right now, once-in-a-generation events. We don't really know what the outcome of this could mean for the United States and the rest of the world. One thing is certain, however, this move is good for Ukraine, if only because the Wagner Group was the only successful Russian force in Ukraine. Now that the Russians have lost the Wagner Group, they've really lost their best troops. They've lost their best fighters in Ukraine. Zelensky and the Ukrainians have got to be celebrating this move. Not only does it pull the best Russian troops out of Ukraine, but it also causes chaos and confusion in Russia. Mass chaos and confusion and a potential split in the Russian army, weakening the Russian army's position dramatically, which could allow Ukraine to execute a counterattack or a counteroffensive, or even just gain the upper hand currently in the war as it stands. So this attempted ongoing coup attempt is certainly good for Ukraine. As for the rest of the world, it's important to note that Yevgeny Prigozhin is not a saint. He's not an angel. He's not, in many ways, he's not preferable to Vladimir Putin. He is a far-right militia leader with fascist tendencies. Some have called him a neo-Nazi. He and the Wagner Group do have far-right beliefs and far-right fascist tendencies. So to have Putin replaced with Prigozhin is not exactly the dream scenario that we would hope for in NATO and the United States. However, for the time being, the way that the threat of Vladimir Putin against the United States, the way he's tampered in our elections, the way he's messed with our democracy, almost brought our democracy to its knees with Russian meddling in our elections, backing Trump, spreading misinformation, spreading division in the United States. Putin has been an incredibly effective enemy to American democracy. So for the time being, we can be happy that Putin is going through some bad times right now. Whether we want Putin replaced by Prigozhin is only time will tell for that. Prigozhin not much better, but one thing is clear: this is good for the Ukrainians. This is probably going to signal, if not the end of the Ukraine war, a dramatic shift in the Ukraine war in Ukraine's favor. So that is something to be good, something to be happy about. Once again, coups are how leadership is changed in Russia. It's what they do. So we will see what happens. We will report on this as more facts come out. But for the time being, just absolutely extraordinary events taking place in the last 24 hours in Russia. For MeidasTouch, this is Troy. Remember, smash that subscribe button to keep supporting independent media.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.